Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be here tonight. My name is MJ Malpidi. I am from Game Over Books. I will be hosting this evening. It's a pleasure to be here as we are here for the release of Discount Ceremony by Timothy Day. This incredible short story collection is out in the world now, and I'm so stoked to hear some ridiculously surreal, absurdly funny, and just the weird gems of stories tonight. We have two long ones for you this evening, and I'm just going to get out of the way and let Tim do his thing for you, but really quick. Timothy Day is a writer, photographer, improv enthusiast, and inspiring filmmaker living in Portland, Oregon. His fiction has appeared in Booth, The Adirondack Journal, Barron Magazine, and elsewhere. You can find him online at timothysomeday.wixsite.com/website. So I'm going to bring Timothy up here right now. All right, Tim, take us away.
Hey guys, thanks so much for being here. I was just telling MJ, well, my cat Posey is usually pretty chill. She really freaks out when I have Zoom up for some reason sometimes. So apologies in advance if there are any Posey interruptions, but I'll just go right into the first story of the collection here, titled You Are Enough. There was one heart monitor in the hospital that wouldn't stop beeping. It just kept on, steady, even after the heart it was monitoring had stopped, even after the nurse unplugged it, even after it was stuffed in the back of an out-of-use supply closet, where it had been for years now, faintly beeping behind the door. People died on the reach of its distant rhythm. Babies were born into its muffled constancy. I sometimes stopped in front of that closet, just to make sure. I will close the closet door and lock Posey out. Let's see. Okay, pardon the interruption. Let's see. I sometimes stopped in front of that closet, just to make sure the monitor was still beeping. I'd come to think of it like the beating of the world's unconscious heart. For it to stop would surely be the worst of omens. But there it was, always, promising to outlive us all. I am so sorry. Miss Nilsat was in the late stages of her illness. I was in charge of checking her vitals, which I did every 4 hours. They'd put her in the worst room of the poor and dying wing, the room for those without visitors, the one with cracks in the walls and quickest access to the morgue. Let's see, I'll open the door and maybe she'll calm down. Hey, Posey, it's okay. We're right here. We're just hanging. We're just hanging. All right. Miss Nilsat was in the late stages of her illness. I was in charge of checking her vitals, which I did every 4 hours. They'd put her in the worst room of the poor and dying wing, the room for those without visitors, the one with cracks in the walls and quickest access to the morgue. Her family was in Florida, she kept saying, which is why they hadn't been to see her. They're chasing the alligators in Florida, she told me. We're a family of gator hunters. That's pretty cool, I said. Miss Nilsat huffed. It's cool as shit. The hospital had tried calling her brother several times, but he just hung up the phone when he heard who it was. There was no one else. If Miss Nilsat wasn't dead by tomorrow, she'd be rolled out to the street and left there. I wondered, hopefully, if maybe she'd rather be outside anyway. If maybe there would be a pretty sunset just when she was passing. But when you're alone, a pretty sunset is still just a pretty sunset. Evening came and Miss Nilsat still wasn't dead. After checking her vitals, I asked my supervisor, Greg, if I could talk to him about her. Like, about where to leave her tomorrow? Greg asked. He wore round glasses over his small, punchy eyes. No, because I told you where to leave her, Ethan. I know. Just on the sidewalk next to the overpass. Right. We stood in the hallway outside her room. The lights were dimmer here than the rest of the hospital. Across the way was the old supply closet and the stairway to the morgue. I was wondering if we could keep her here a little longer, I said. Greg shook his head. I don't understand. Just until she passes on, I said. Her release date is tomorrow. But there's nobody to take her. Correct, Greg said, which is why you're leaving her by the overpass. Did you forget where to leave her? No, I can remind you tomorrow morning. That's not the issue. All good then, Greg smiled. Maybe write yourself a note, like overpass, with a little drawing of the patient beside it. That helps me sometimes. He patted me on the shoulder and made his way back up the hallway. Miss Millsap felt different, though she shouldn't have. We'd all had to leave patients on the street before, usually beside the overpass. I guess I felt like we had a sort of connection. Most of the people I attended to didn't speak much. They were either too sad or physically unable to. Miss Millsap would tell me stories, though, ask about my life, and sometimes she would make a joke about the hospital food, and we would share a laugh. I was moved by her persistence in putting pain beneath a pillow. Like, it wasn't that her family didn't care about her. It was that they were gator hunters. It wasn't that she was dying. It was that she lived a life full of late nights, and this was just the final morning after. It wasn't that all of her friends were dead. It was that they were waiting for her. I understood her need for happily designed fabric covering pits of sad. After my shift, I went down to the morgue to see my friend Tom. I don't know if Tom thought of us as friends, actually, because mostly he didn't look at me or respond when I talked. But I thought he was pretty cool. He had tattoos of beer cans on his palms, and his hair was long like a rock star's. That night, Tom was sitting in the purple armchair beside the cold lockers, his thumb swiping languidly across the screen of his phone. I sat on the floor against the lockers of beef sticks, which is what Tom called the dead bodies. I have to leave a patient on the street tomorrow, I said. Tom stared at his phone, mouth slightly open. They don't have anyone to pick them up, I added. Tom wiped the back of his hand across his nose and sniffed loudly. Where would you want to be left, I asked, when you die? In a bird feeder, Tom said. I was confused. How would you fit? Tom stared at me blankly. My ashes, stupid. He slouched further in the chair and looked back at his phone. Just grind me up like coffee and put me in there. It'd be like a major prank on the birds. Oh yeah, duh, I blushed. That'd be hilarious. Fucking A, Tom said. I lived alone. It had been like that for a while. I'd gotten used to it, I guess. Though when you get used to something sad, it's still sad, just in a way you don't think about as much. In the days of Darren and Alicia, before they decided that they just wanted to be with each other, I would come home to love, and that love would take up all the space inside me as I moved about the apartment. Now I come home and I go along with my aloneness, but still that space wonders, what is going to fill me? It always seems to expect something, even after all this time. That night I made pasta and ate it while looking out the window, watching the mother and daughter who play together in the street below my apartment. The daughter had a disfigurement that rendered her features blurry, like someone being interviewed on the news who wants to remain anonymous. The blocky pixels shifted and crackled on her face as she ran around and jumped rope. They often played late at night like this, and I wondered if the mother or daughter was ashamed of the blur, or if they both were. I wanted to tell them not to be, but who was I to say that? Shame had keys to all of my locks. In bed, I lay awake and thought about Miss Nilstout, coughing to herself in that old room at the end of the hospital's poor and dying wing. There are stretches of life I imagine to be far crueler than death. The only reason we stay in them is the chance of their end. If only we knew death past the beginning. But I suppose that could be said about most things. I got to the hospital early the next morning and checked on Miss Nilstout. Greg was in the room already, looking over a form. Just need to check a few more boxes here, he said. You understand that you do not possess the funds to remain at the Eternal Love Hospital until your imminent death? I understand, Miss Nilstout said. She looked incredibly frail, having passed into that phase of sickness where one resembles a skeleton more than a living person. Greg checked a box. You understand that you have no family willing to let you die in their home, nor pay for you to remain at the Eternal Love Hospital until the time of your aforementioned imminent death. I understand, Miss Nilstout said. Very good. Greg scribbled something and nodded at me. She's all yours. He made his way out, stopping at the door and looking back at Miss Nilstout. When you get to the other side, say hi to John Lennon for me. I lost my virginity to Imagine. He stood there grinning for what seemed a long time, then left. I sat beside Miss Nilstout and checked her vitals, though it didn't really matter at this point. I'm going to miss you, I said. Yes, Miss Nilstout nodded. Let's get on with it. Hey, pussies. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. I wheeled Miss Nilstout out of the hospital. The sun was still rising outside, and the sky was like grainy orange juice. Tom was taking a smoke break, and I stopped to say hello. This the dying lady? Tom nodded at Miss Nilstout. It is, Miss Nilstout said. I have to take her to the overpass, I said. Tom flicked his cigarette on the sidewalk. I'll come, he said. I need to move around a little. So the three of us made our way off hospital grounds and down the side of the highway. I tried to wheel Miss Nilsout's stretcher as smoothly as I could, but it still bumped around a good bit on the gravelly pavement. Tom shouted over the roar of passing cars, telling us about all the cocaine he did last night. At one point, I was like, fuck, I could fucking fly right now if I wanted to, he said. But then I just cleaned my fucking bathroom. I thought Tom was pretty cute when he got excited like this. Miss Nilstout had her eyes closed, but she was smiling. I think she was enjoying Tom's story. We approached the overpass, and I weaved Miss Nilstout around a clutter of abandoned shopping carts. I always loved the word celestial, Miss Nilstout said, voice skidding as she rode across the uneven ground. I suppose dying out here will be kind of celestial in its way. I could see that, I said. And I could, maybe. It seemed better to try and see it, anyway. There was a little chalk outline indicating where to leave patients like Miss Nilstout, and I steered the stretcher inside of it. Below us, the cars on the freeway were already in gridlock. Their windows glinted angrily in the morning sun. I took a deep breath. I didn't know what to say. Tom leaned against the railing and lit a cigarette. So this is it, huh? Miss Nilstout said. I guess so, I said. I'm sorry I can't do more, Miss Nilstout. Quiet. Miss Nilstout patted my wrist. I'm trying to die. She squeezed her eyes closed and clenched her fists. I joined Tom at the side of the overpass, and we watched Miss Nilstout willing death to come. Car horns blared from below. Let's go, Tom sniffed. Smells like piss. Just give me a second. I went back to Miss Nilstout, thinking it might be nice for her if I held her hand for a moment. When I did, though, her palm was cold and limp. Her face had gone slack, paler than pale, and when I checked her pulse, I felt nothing. She's gone, I called out to Tom. Nice of her to wait until we got all the way out here, Tom huffed. Might as well drag her ass back. So I wheeled Miss Nilsout's body back to the hospital while Tom talked about necrophilia. Apparently he suspected that his cousin Jim was into it. When we got to the hospital, I asked Tom if he would maybe want to have a drink that night. He seemed to be talking to me more than usual. Nah, Tom said. No offense, dude, but you're kind of weird. He took Miss Nilsat's stretcher from me and headed down to the morgue. Probably it had just been the cocaine. I went to the out-of-use supply closet and leaned my head against the door. The heart monitor inside was still beeping away. I imagined Miss Nilsat becoming a part of it, her heartbeat leaving this world and entering the collective pulse of the monitor. It was a nice thought. When Darren and Alicia told me they were leaving, I asked them why, as if I didn't know. They were leaving because they loved each other more than they loved me. When they traded glances, there was a new language present in the air between them, one that didn't include me. When they spoke, it was for my benefit, because they both had the words in their heads already. I said maybe it would come, a love for me that was equal to their love for each other. Maybe it was close behind. They shook their heads, and I screamed into a pillow. I was nearing the end of my shift when Greg told me there was a new patient in the poor and dying wing. Hit by a car on her way home from work, he said. Her daughter's here. Really weird kid, all blurry in the face. Oh, I said, I think I know them. That right? Well, not exactly, I said. We're neighbors, I think. Okay, Ethan, okay. Greg threw his hands up. I don't need your whole life story. I hurried to the woman's room. She was in pretty bad shape, with a broken collarbone and lots of bruises around her ribs. Her daughter sat beside the hospital bed, blurry chin resting on her fist. My name's Ethan, I said. I'm just here to make sure you're doing okay. I got hit by a car, the woman said. Right, I said, reading her heart monitor. That was a stupid thing to say. Sorry. You are enough, said the daughter. I paused and looked at where her eyes seemed to be. What? She pointed behind me, and I looked over my shoulder. There was a poster of a mountain on the wall, the frame moldy and cracked. I'd seen it a million times, but never really looked at it. You are enough was printed beneath the mountain, which I thought was silly because how could any of us live up to a mountain? I don't get it, said the daughter. Her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. I guess it's like telling you that you don't need to be anything more than you are to be worthy of love, I said. You are enough. The girl's blurry head dipped, and she knocked her dangling shoes together. Do you believe that? I do, I said. And I did. Thanks, guys. And sorry again about Cozy. Zoom just really makes her go crazy. It's pretty funny. That's a again that's the first story in the collection. And yeah, it's kind of the whole book is kind of split into an A side and a B side, which was the idea of my graduate school thesis advisor, Madeline McDonnell, who kind of thought the A side could be like the happier, sunnier stories, and then the B side being like the darker, creepier stories. And yeah, I like that one being at the front because I feel like it kind of embodies both of those vibes. But with that said, I'll move on to one of the purely darker stories later in the collection. This one's called Stroller. Gretchen left her apartment Monday to find a stroller in the hallway, abandoned beside her door. It was old and dirty, one of the wheels missing on the left side. In the carriage was not a baby, but a nest of wrinkled receipts. Yours, dear. Miss Carricombe, her neighbor, peered out at Gretchen from behind a cracked door. The inside of her apartment was always dark, her face at the door like a dying candle. No, Gretchen shook her head. I don't have a kid. That's right, Miss Carrickham said, voice little more than a whisper. We are both solitary passengers. She smiled a bit, then withdrew to her apartment. Gretchen looked down the hallway. Plain white walls and tired beige carpeting that hadn't been vacuumed in who knows how long. There was only one other apartment on their floor, but it hadn't been occupied for over a year. Gretchen stared at the crinkled bed of receipts in the stroller. Though she could plainly see there was nothing underneath them, just the torn fabric of the carriage. It felt as if there was. At work, there was a lot of excitement about her coworker Mason's new baby. Gretchen thought of the stroller outside her apartment and all those receipts, some invisible thing squirming beneath them. Mason was going around to everyone's cubicle, showing them pictures. Gretchen put her headphones on when he got to the accounting department. She pretended to focus on her screen and waited a bit, then looked over her shoulder, figuring Mason had moved on. But there he stood. Hey, Gretchen, he muttered. I have pictures of the baby. Gretchen smiled and nodded. Mason inched forward, his face greasy and drained of color, until the screen of his phone was before her. The screen showed a baby. It was, Gretchen thought, a perfectly standard baby. Mason's fingers swiped through several more photos. The finger trembled a bit over the screen, Mason pausing between pictures to give Gretchen enough time to take them in. Cute, Gretchen said. Her name's Gretchen too, Mason said, chuckling. Named after my grandmother. Not after me, Gretchen joked. Oh, well, no, Mason said, looking at his phone. After my grandmother. I was just kidding, Gretchen said. Oh, right. Mason put a hand on his chest, and his face contorted with laughter, though he made barely a sound, only a slight wheezing noise, like rusted ventilation. That was funny, he said. Gretchen nodded, then looked at the floor until Mason left. During her lunch, Gretchen sat alone in the break room and thought about baby Gretchen. Everything new to her, her existence a blank slate. It seemed unfair that this would be her one shot, that in 30 years she wouldn't get to go back to where she was now and have a second chance at life. Didn't everyone deserve that? The world was too punishing to navigate ably the first time around. Gretchen chewed on her sandwich, rubbery and sour tasting. Soon Mika from sales came into the break room and leaned onto the table. You see baby Gretchen? She asked. Mason showed me, Gretchen said. Mika went to the coffee station and got a mug out of the cabinet. What a cutie, huh? Almost makes me want kids. Emphasis on the almost. I think I'm jealous of her, Gretchen said. Mika leaned back against the counter with her coffee. She had black hair that hung down to her neck and wore a blouse patterned with tiny slices of pizza. Everyone's jealous of babies, she said. You just have to think like, well, I'm not this beautiful baby with zero emotional damage and its whole life ahead of it. But also I can drink and I'm not shitting my pants all the time. Gretchen laughed half-heartedly. What was the emotional damage of nothingness, she wondered. What were the marks made on one's soul by a life of blank spaces? When Gretchen got home, the stroller was still there in the hallway beside her door. She peered into the carriage. Were there more receipts in it than before? The nest of them seemed thicker now, and taller, rising halfway to the lip of the carriage. Gretchen picked one up and examined it, but the print was too faint to make out. She tried another, but it, too, had faded beyond readability. They were all like that, she realized, all of them vague and indecipherable with age. Her apartment was cold and dark. Gretchen got the leftover Chinese takeout she had in the fridge and turned on the television, covering herself with a blanket. An old black and white horror movie was on, featuring a rubber-suited monster chasing after a plucky newswoman. Gretchen tried to follow the story, but she couldn't stop thinking about the stroller, parked just outside her door, as if waiting to get in. She decided she would wheel it out to the street if it was still there in the morning. Gretchen turned the heater off and went to bed. Through the wall in her bedroom, she could hear Miss Carracombe ironing. She had insomnia, and during the night would iron all the old dresses in her closet. The sound, like an iron lung in a lonely hospital wing, had become a comfort to Gretchen, soothing her to sleep. Her dreams were occupied by strange, disjointed sequences. Miss Carracombe, ironing a rubber suit of herself by candlelight. Mason, holding baby Gretchen in his arms as he roamed the office. A slow rain of receipts floating down from the ceiling. And finally Mika, taking her hand and leading her into the vacant apartment at the end of the hall, then disappearing. Alone, Gretchen went from room to room, all of them empty. Why was she here? Where had Mika gone? Outside the windows, there was nothing but a thick wall of fog. Gretchen woke with a lingering sense of confusion. She got up, made coffee, and ate a slice of toast, looking out at the drab gray morning. The silence felt overwhelming. One shouldn't ever have to hear their own chewing, she decided. In the hallway, the stroller was still there, the receipts piled higher, nearly reaching the top. Who kept putting them there? Gretchen took the handlebar and wheeled the stroller out to the street. It kept swerving due to the missing wheel, and she had to ride it repeatedly. It didn't feel like enough for the stroller to simply be moved out of the building, so she pushed it 2 blocks down, leaving it beside the dumpster of another complex. There, she thought. The day seemed to drag on forever. Gretchen had a sick feeling that she would return home to find that the stroller had resumed its post beside her door, receipts overflowing from the carriage. At one point, she thought she heard a baby crying and stood nervously to look over the walls of her cubicle. There she was, baby Gretchen, crying and flailing about on Mason's computer screen, just a few cubicles away. Gretchen could see the top of Mason's head as he leaned towards the screen, the gray spots in his hair like little colonies of decay. There she is, he kept saying. There's Gretchen. There it is, Gretchen thought, a completely new person. For just a moment, baby Gretchen looked up over the cubicle walls, locking eyes with her. Gretchen quickly sat back down. Baby Gretchen cried and cried. She didn't realize that she had no reason to cry, that adults were the ones with endless reasons to cry and no one to listen to them. There she is, Mason's voice creeped across the office. There's Gretchen. Mika stopped by Gretchen's cubicle on her way out and asked if she wanted to go out later. Sounds fun, Gretchen said, downplaying her excitement. A night out together was something real friends did, a push past the usual camaraderie of their workplace relationship. Good, Mika said, because sweet baby Gretchen, do I need a drink. Pardon the posy interruption. All right. To Gretchen's relief, the hallway remained empty when she got home. She made dinner and took a shower, putting on a modest blue dress she'd only worn a handful of times over the last few years. As she locked up her apartment to leave, Gretchen heard the creak of Miss Carracombe's door behind her, wedging open to reveal the old woman's shadowed visage. A night on the town, she asked, voice throaty and hushed, like a rusted fan blowing weakly in some forgotten corner. My first in a while, Gretchen said. A celebration of youth, Miss Carracombe said. Good for you, dear. There is never anything to celebrate alone. Gretchen smiled and stood there another moment, then said goodnight and left down the hall. The bar they met at was crowded and dimly lit. Gretchen ordered a vodka martini and squeezed into an open section of seating with Mika. Mika hadn't changed from her work outfit, a fish pattern blouse tucked into a pencil skirt. More than that, her personality and level of comfort seemed to be the same at the bar as it would have been anywhere else. Gretchen longed to move through the world like that, to feel at home in its spaces, to be a part of the picture instead of a superimposed image. So what's going on with grown-up Gretchen? Mika asked. Gretchen paused. This was usually the part where she would say something like, nothing much, or the usual. Terrible answers rising from hollow places inside of her. Instead, she told Mika about the stroller in the hallway, about the receipts. That's weird, Mika said. Maybe somewhere there's a baby trapped in someone's folder of financial records. And someone keeps adding more, Gretchen continued, an anxious edge to her voice. More? Receipts. Mika shrugged. Someone on your floor? I had to move it, Gretchen said, holding tight to her glass. I had this feeling that something terrible would happen once the receipts reached the top. Mika was looking at her strangely. What did you think would happen? I don't know, Gretchen said. Just something bad. The music and chatter all around them seemed to go quiet for a moment, swallowed by the discomfort in Mika's eyes. I'm gonna go get another drink, Mika said, standing from the table. Gretchen nodded and looked down at her glass. By the time Mika returned, the noise in the room had leveled out. What Gretchen liked the most was the laughter that rippled through the space, friendly and warm. Mika took a swig of her beer. John's gonna be here soon. John was Mika's fiance. Gretchen had never met him, but Mika had shown her a picture once. Gretchen wished he wasn't coming. She couldn't help feeling like a third wheel around couples. Mika looked at her. Hey, it's been a weird week with all this baby stuff, she said in a mollifying tone. But don't worry, I'm staying childless as you. Gretchen finished her drink. I don't want a baby, she mumbled, mostly to herself. I just want. But Mika was already standing and making her way to the door, where she met John as he entered and gave him a kiss. Gretchen felt a pang in her chest. She got up and closed her tab. She said goodbye to Mika, telling John it was nice to meet him, even though she hadn't said her name. I forgot I have to go in early tomorrow, she lied. No worries, babe, Mika said, giving her a quick hug before disappearing into the crowd. At work the next day, there was a stroller left beside the elevator, shiny and new, void of receipts. Gretchen hurried down the hall and ducked into her cubicle. The erratic laughter of baby Gretchen bubbled up from the other side of the office. The voices of her coworkers cooed beneath it, their tones lifted and fun-housed. Gretchen signed into her computer and opened the accounting software, just like she did every morning. She began executing first priority tasks from the queue, just like she did every morning. She paused to get coffee from the break room, just like she did every morning. On the way back to her desk, she saw a pair of suited arms hoist baby Gretchen up above Mason's cubicle, holding her there. Baby Gretchen appeared frightened for a moment, but then seemed to gain her bearings, looking out across the office with curiosity. Her eyes landed on Gretchen. Gretchen shifted her gaze to the floor, but she could still feel the baby staring at her, eyes glassy with a terribly innocent indifference, like an insect observing the slow death of another. Gretchen went to the bathroom and sat in one of the stalls, waiting until baby Gretchen was taken home. She couldn't stand to look at it again, to see in its face the million chances to live that she would never have again. Eventually, she heard a clutter of doting goodbyes from out on the floor, and the usual hush of the office was restored. spread thick over an undercurrent of phones and business cadence. Gretchen returned to her desk, signed back into her computer, and resumed executing the day's tasks. The morning sogged into afternoon. Gretchen felt as if she were wearing a rubber suit of herself, every limb heavier, every sound muffled and stretched like taffy, everything she felt buffered by layers of some strange anesthesia. Her mind, she thought, was filling with smoke, smoke that was corroding the lining of her senses. At one point, Mika was standing by her cubicle, saying something about last night. Gretchen just nodded. Mika gave her that look again, like she was from a different species. Then she was gone. Gretchen finished every task in the queue and left the office early. No one seemed to take any notice. The ding of the elevator echoed dully in her ears the whole way down. Gretchen lay in bed, wide awake. It had been hours like this now, evening turning to night and night turning to the dead of night. Through the wall there came the gentle exhale of steam from Miss Karakum's iron. In her mind's eye, Gretchen saw the stroller. It sat in shadow beside the dumpster, tilted on the side of its missing wheel. Something was burning at the bottom of the carriage. The fire somehow wasn't catching the layers of receipts, small trails of smoke coming up through them. Gretchen watched, hypnotized. Suddenly things shifted, and she was in the stroller, placidly aflame. The receipts on top of her felt heavy, as if made of lead. Gretchen woke up panting. It was still dark, but she didn't hear Miss Karakum ironing. She got up and wandered to the kitchen for a glass of water. The weight of the receipts seemed to have stuck to her, and every movement was an effort. The clock in the kitchen read 3:07. She tried to take a drink of water, but her arm could hardly get the glass off the counter. Did she pull a muscle in her sleep? But it was every muscle, pinned down and turned to jelly, as if she were dragging stones around the morning after running a marathon. Leaving the kitchen, she realized that moving was easier if she went towards the front door. If she diverted by stepping into the hall, heading towards her bedroom, it was as if she were walking into a strong wind. Her muscles were stronger, the weight on them lighter, as long as she was going in the direction of the door. It continued like this out into the hallway. Gretchen stood and felt around for a give in the pressure pushing down on her body. She soon found it, like a pathway in the air, leading her towards the empty apartment at the end of the hall. Its door was ajar. Gretchen's thoughts grew faint and opaque, melting into a muddled soup of fear and confusion. She couldn't remember why she was in the hallway, standing in front of the door at the end of the hall. When she tried to turn around, the pressure against her was remarkably strong. She continued into the empty apartment. Candles lit her path on either side of the foyer. Her movements felt less and less her own. Rather, it was as if her body were being pulled forward by some outside party. She came to the living room. In the center of the floor sat the stroller, now empty. A clutter of candles had been placed around it, illuminating the receipts that lined the walls. Gretchen watched her feet approach the stroller, then stop. There she is, a voice floated into the room. There's Gretchen. Thanks, guys.
Tim Day, everybody. Oh my god. I'm still trying to get my bearings after that. That was super creepy.
I'm so glad.
Oh no, so good. Yes, everyone in the chat, please give all the love to Tim right now. That was phenomenal. What incredible stories that we got this evening, and thank you so much for taking us through that journey. So we are going to do a little Q&A with the author. So if anyone in the chat has any questions, please feel free to throw them out here. I have a couple of things that I've just written up really quick that I'm gonna throw out. But anyone else has anything, I'd love to get to it. And I completely agree with Victoria. Just an incredible mix of humor and horror. I think that's what's really special about this particular collection of short stories. But I want to start with first. Can you hold up the book? Can you hold up the cover I got going on
Yeah,
there?
was,
Yeah, look at this cover. I
yeah,
believe it's Dave Mann, right? Mahan, correct?
yeah,
Awesome, awesome. So I want to talk about this cover really quick, in particular, what that process felt like for you, and how you might have worked with Dave to kind of come up with this little image here, how like the stories themselves may have influenced this collage of like grunge and dirtiness and
yeah,
darkness and loneliness. Like it's perfect. It really is.
yeah. No, he had the great idea of like making the cover like some sort of post-apocalyptic like monument. And he sent me a rough sketch of what that might look like, and he was including some random objects in the monuments, and throughout the story there's like a few like kind of key symbols, and so I thought, oh, like it'd be so cool if he could like just like sub in some of the like symbols from the book into the monument, and so you can kind of see like the heart monitor at the top from the first story, and then there's the creepy ass stroller, that is just, yeah, he did perfectly. And yeah, so the rest of the uh, weird stuff on here are all like kind of important like objects found throughout the stories, and so I thought that would kind of make for a fun reading experience to kind of be like, oh, there's that thing from from the cover, and yeah, it turned out amazing. Yeah, he did a fantastic job.
So I want to kind of like talked about this a little bit when you were going into the A side B side, because I did want to know, I feel like it's so hard with like short story collections to think about the ordering and like the thematic arcs of that. So how did you go about deciding what was truly the A side or the B side? Because I even think you said yourself, like even with that first story, there still was like that bit of, like creep in there, right? So like how did you go about deciphering like, all right, this is definitely like an A side, and then obviously this has to be dark and over here on the B side, right?
Yeah, for some of the stories it was tougher, but most of the A side stories are like the older stories that I wrote. Some of them are like, yeah, probably 7 years old at this point. But and then the past few years, I did, uh, yeah, I have just written like more horror adjacent type stories, and so the B side really ended up filling out. So I kind of had the A side in place for a while, and but then my advisor Madeline kind of noticed at the time we were working together, like that I was starting to write like stories with a little more darkness to them, less bright quirkiness, which I still love, and would love to, yeah, write more of those types of stories as well. But
Not easy right now.
um, but yeah, so my thesis at Portland State University was, yeah, a very early version of this book, that was kind of mostly the A side stories, and but some felt like kind of in between, like they had both. And so other than You Are Enough, which I did really want at the beginning, I tried to make like some of the middle stories kind of to kind of act as a bridge to, um, yeah, try to pick out a few stories that had a little less of like outright brightness, and the yeah, that sort of sunny quirkiness that the first half has a lot of. Yeah.
Yeah, just like kind of slowly blurring it more and more,
Mhm.
going into that gray. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Mhm.
It's awesome. So I know that once once books are out into the world, right? Once people get their hands on them, everyone kind of gets their own thing out of any particular like collection of stories or poems or what have you. And so I like to ask authors, what do you hope, if there's any like one or a couple particular things that you want someone to take away from this collection, particularly in some of the themes that you're talking about here, which are very heavy in terms of just loneliness, arrested development. Like, what do you hope that people can come away knowing or experiencing?
Um, the first thing that comes to mind is I just hope it makes people feel less alone when they are reading it. A lot of the characters are kind of at like this tipping point where they are feeling pretty disconnected from the world, and they kind of are either able to find something or someone to kind of like hold on to and keep going, or they become like completely untethered in the second half and fall into some kind of oblivion. But which I think I feel like, you know, I on that line every now and then, and as you know, I think we all do. And so yeah, I hope that's like the dominant feeling is just I hope the reader feels like uh feels like the characters are friends almost. um
Sure.
and that's yeah, just it makes them feel less alone while they're reading. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you saw in the chat, there are definitely folks relating to some of this work. Absolutely. Myself included. Especially, I think it was funny. Penelope shared the first part, and then I immediately shared the second part. But then from the first story, where it was like, what was the emotional damage of nothingness? What were the marks made on one soul by a life of blank stasis? I resonated with that so friggin' hard. It was just, yeah. So I
Yeah.
think you really nailed it there. And kind of going off of that a little bit, uh, do you feel like there's any, and I'm sure many aspects came out in different characters, but was there any character that you felt was like the most you in the story? If you know what I mean, like you were like, yeah, I really put myself in here. When you go back and look at it.
I very often I would say, yeah, a lot of these characters, the "You Are Enough" narrator, I felt very close to. I mean, Gretchen, I felt very close to. Um, uh, yeah, I would say the majority of the narrators in here. There actually is a story called "Cody Wants to Be Human." That's the fourth story in the book that I wrote as like a we were reading like a auto fiction book in class at the time, and so I kind of wrote that as a riff on that idea. So that might be the most like intentionally similar um, narrator, but yeah, a lot of these there are just a handful where I tried to like really kind of step out of my voice and try on a different one, which was really fun too. But yeah, the majority of these stories I'm very much in. Yeah.
That's totally fair. So it's autobiographical. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. To an extent, yeah.
And kind of going off of that now, what story in particular are you the most excited for people to read and experience? Because there's a lot of good ones. There's a lot of really good ones that I don't entirely know if people are prepared for, but I'm excited for them to get them.
Thanks. Yeah. You know, the first one I read tonight, "You Are Enough," has kind of become like my overall favorite. And yeah, so that's the one that I guess I would be just the most excited about sharing. There's there's a lot that I'm excited about. Uh, I mean, I'm excited about the whole thing, but yeah, I wrote "You Are Enough" a couple years ago, and it was just one of those stories where I really felt like I um, just like captured this weird, sad, hopefully poignant emotion, just how I wanted to. So I ended up, yeah, just being really proud of that story. Yeah, so that's what comes to mind first.
Amazing. I think you should really be proud of all of them. Absolutely. I'm really excited for people to read Dirt. I think that was one in particular that a lot of us on the crew over at Game Over Books were like,
Yeah,
we read that one. We were like, well, we're gonna print this. I was
yeah, it's funny. I wanted to read that one too tonight, but going back to what you were kind of just saying about uh, art, how much are you in the book? The narrators of You Are Enough and Dirt are very, very similar, and so I was like, oh, it'd be tough to read both of them in the same reading because it kind of just sounds like the same voice. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, I love that one too. That's one of the oldest ones in this book, and yeah, one of the stories where I yeah, really started to feel like I was, yeah, finding my own voice. So yeah, that story is special to me too.
And we had a question from the chat from Victoria.
Oh, yeah.
Were there any reoccurring motifs that came up for you in multiple stories?
Mm. Um, I mean, definitely like thematically overall things. Not specific uh not specific like symbols, but definitely like what I meant for them to like symbolize. There's a lot of similarity. Um, there's a lot of like characters who are just kind of reaching this point. There's a lot of like quarter life crisis type of stuff where um, characters are just like finding that their life isn't what they hoped it was, but they're like still just like trying to find these little moments of happiness and connection in like just smaller ways than they had maybe once envisioned. Um, but kind of hopefully coming to terms with those being just as significant as their um, earlier dreams of what would happen. Um, so a lot of the symbols in the book do kind of like speak to thematics around that, I would say. Um, and yeah, that's yeah, no direct symbols kind of repeat, but what they mean often does kind of repeat. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. Well, I have one more question to tee up for you, but if anyone else in the chat has anything, please feel free to throw this out. But I'm curious, what were some of your overall influences in terms of creative works or artists that helped you, particularly like comedic and like horror genre, right? Because that's the particular blend we got going here. And you really nail it.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Definitely the earlier stories, I was obsessed with Miranda July's writing for a long time. And her short story collection, No One Belongs Here More Than You, was kind of like the first story collection that I came across in college that I was just like obsessed with. Like, yes, this is what I want to do. And her stories are really sweet and poignant, but they also have this like very wicked humor. And yeah, so a lot of that influence is there, especially in the A side, and then yeah, I've always been into like horror movies, but I for a while just didn't wasn't thinking about writing horror stories because I was skeptical that I could capture as much of an atmosphere as horror movies do. But then a couple years I found this writer Brian Evanson, who I have become obsessed with, who's yeah just this really psychological atmospheric horror writer, and yeah, so his influence is very present in the second half. And yeah, then magical realism authors as well. I was really into Amy Bender during grad school, and her kind of surreal comic deadpanness. um, so yeah, but a really um, mix of writers that maybe wouldn't you wouldn't think to put together um, at first blush, but who yeah I've come to love equally, just yeah for different reasons.
Well, that's perfect. Well, I'm so grateful because we got this incredible collection today. Well, if anyone else else doesn't have any questions, I think that is our show for this evening. Again, so excited for Discount Ceremony to be out in the world. For folks that may not have gotten a copy yet, I will drop this little link in the chat. But it is out and about on Game Over Books and soon bookstores near you. So we're so excited for this incredible collection. Thank you everybody for coming out and just hanging out, listen to a couple good stories. You could do anything right now on a Friday night, but you're here for the good. And we appreciate that so much.
Thank you
And
guys
again,
so much. Yeah.
this collection. I'm gonna